The day I found out my retirement account was empty, I thought the bank had made a mistake. $400,000 gone. 40 years of waking up before sunrise, pouring concrete in winter, climbing scaffolding with bad knees, missing birthdays, skipping vacations. All of it reduced to one number on a screen. 0. I stood there at the bank counter, staring at the cashier like I hadn't heard him correctly. "There must be some mistake," I said. He looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, sir, but the withdrawals were authorized. Your son had joint access on the account." My son. Daniel. The same boy I worked double shifts for. The same boy whose college loans I paid. The same boy I trusted enough to give access, not ownership, just access in case something ever happened to me. And now my retirement was gone. I'm Walter Hayes, 69 years old, retired construction worker. Bad knees, high blood pressure, and a body that remembers every brick I ever lifted. That money wasn't luxury. It was survival. It was my knee surgery. It was peace. It was the right to grow old without asking anyone for permission. I drove home in silence. Every red light felt longer. Every memory felt heavier. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe an emergency. Maybe fraud. Maybe something I didn't understand. Because surely your own son doesn't empty your life, savings, and forgets to mention it. Right? When I walked into Daniel's house, he was sitting on the couch, shoes off, television on, like it was any ordinary Tuesday. His wife, Melissa, was at the kitchen counter, scrolling through furniture pictures on her phone. I stood there holding the bank statement in my hand. Daniel looked up. "Hey, Dad." Casual. Comfortable. That scared me more than panic would have. I held up the paper. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is." He glanced at it. Didn't even pretend to be confused. Instead, he leaned back and sighed. "I was going to tell you. That sentence changes a man, because it means they knew exactly what they were did." Melissa finally looked up and said, "Honestly, Walter, you should be happy. It's an investment. A family investment." I stared at her. My hands were shaking. "My retirement fund is your investment?" Daniel stood up then, annoyed, not ashamed. "Dad, relax. We used it for the down payment on the new house." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because sometimes the truth is too absurd for anger. "My surgery," I said quietly. "My retirement." "You used that?" He shrugged. And then he said the sentence I will remember for the rest of my life. "You're old anyway. What do you need that much money for?" Silence. Real silence. The kind that ends relationships. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't standing in my son's house. I was standing in the place where trust had just died. And what I did next, they never saw coming. For a few seconds, I just stood there looking at him, waiting for him to laugh, to say it was a bad joke, to show even the smallest sign of shame. Nothing. Daniel crossed his arms like I was the one being unreasonable. Melissa went back to scrolling through pictures of white kitchens and marble floors, like we were discussing the weather. That hurt more than the money, because theft by desperation is one thing. Theft without guilt is something else. I put the bank statement on the table between us. 40 years, I said. That account took me 40 years. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Dad, you're making this bigger than it is. Bigger than it is? Yes, it's not like we wasted it. We bought a home. Something real. Something that helps the family. I nodded slowly. The family? Melissa smiled without warmth. Well, eventually it would all come to Daniel anyway. There it was. Not support. Not love. Entitlement. They weren't borrowing. They believed it already belonged to them. I looked around that house at framed photos, the expensive coffee machine I had helped pay for last Christmas, the comfort they called hard work. And suddenly, I understood something painful. I hadn't raised a son. I had raised a man who mistook my sacrifices for his inheritance. "Give it back," I said. Daniel actually laughed. "Dad, it's already done. The papers are signed. We move next week." Move. That word hit differently. "You bought a new house?" Melissa stood up, excited now. "It's beautiful. 4 bedrooms, open kitchen, huge backyard. Honestly, it's the kind of place we should have had years ago." She said we like I was part of the celebration. I stared at them both. And for the first time, I saw them clearly not as family, but as people calculating what I was worth. "When were you planning to tell me?" I asked. Daniel shrugged. "We were going to help you too. There's a really nice nursing home near the new place. You'd be comfortable there. A nursing home." I felt my chest tighten. Not from anger, from clarity. They had already planned my ending. Take the money. Take the house. Put the old man somewhere quiet. Visit on holidays if convenient. I picked up the bank statement again, folded it carefully, because rage makes people sloppy, and I was done being sloppy. I looked at my son and said, very calmly, "You think this is finished because you signed papers." I put the paper in my jacket pocket. "But Daniel, paperwork cuts both ways." He frowned. Melissa looked annoyed. Neither of them understood. Not yet. Because what they didn't know was simple, that $400,000 was only the account they could see. Not the full story. Not even close. And the house they were celebrating? It was about to become the most expensive mistake of their lives. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of the money. Because of the sentence. "You're old anyway." Funny how one line can replay louder than a lifetime of memories. I sat in my kitchen with a cold cup of coffee, staring at the wall Margaret used to decorate every Christmas. My wife had been gone 6 years, but some nights it still felt like she had just stepped into the next room. She would have known what to say. She always did. Probably something simple. Something like, "Walter, stop confusing love with permission." She was smarter than me in that way. I spent too many years believing sacrifice automatically creates gratitude. It doesn't. Sometimes it just teaches people how much they can take. By morning, I had made my decision. No shouting. No begging. No family drama. Just facts. I called my attorney, Frank Dalton. We had known each other for nearly 25 years. He handled Margaret's will, the sale of my brother's property, and every serious decision I was smart enough not to make alone. When he answered, he heard it in my voice immediately. "What happened?" I told him everything. The withdrawals, the house, the nursing home. A long silence followed. Then he said, "Do you still have the account records?" "Yes." "Good. Bring everything today." By noon, I was sitting across from him in his office, the same leather chair I'd sat in when Margaret and I first wrote our wills. Funny how life brings you back to the same rooms for very different reasons. Frank adjusted his glasses and read through the statements carefully. Every transfer, every signature, every withdrawal. When he finished, he leaned back. "They used stolen funds for the down payment." I nodded. He tapped the papers. "That gives us leverage." I asked the question I had been carrying since yesterday. "Can I get it back?" He looked at me for a moment, then said, "Yes, and possibly more." That was the first time I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted dignity. There's a difference. Frank opened another folder. "One more thing," he said. "You never told Daniel about the commercial property trust?" I shook my head. No reason to. That property 3 rental units and a small warehouse on the edge of Town was worth more than the retirement account. Margaret and I bought it quietly years ago. It paid steady income, and Daniel assumed I lived only on savings. I preferred it that way. Frank nodded. Good. Let him keep underestimating you. He slid a document across the desk. We're going to place an immediate legal hold on the new house purchase. If the down payment came from your stolen retirement fund, we can challenge ownership. I signed without hesitation. For the first time since the bank, I felt calm. Because silence is powerful when it has paperwork behind it. Daniel thought he had taken my future. He had no idea. He had just financed his own downfall. The next week was strangely quiet. Too quiet. Daniel didn't call. Melissa didn't text. No apologies. No explanations. Just silence. The kind of silence people keep when they believe they've already won. I let them have it. Frank filed everything quickly. He moved like a man who had seen greed before and had no patience left for it. The legal hold was placed before the final ownership transfer could settle completely. That mattered, because people love to say, it's already done. Lawyers love proving otherwise. 3 days later, Daniel called. His voice was sharper than usual. Dad, did you do something with the house? I was sitting on my porch, watering a plant Margaret once insisted I would kill. I'm not sure, I said. Did I? Don't do that. The bank called. There's some issue with the down payment. I took my time answering. Interesting, Dad. There it was, that tone children use when they suddenly remember they need you. I almost admired it. You stole my retirement, I said. Now you're surprised paperwork followed? He exhaled hard. We didn't steal anything. You gave me access. Access is not ownership. A long pause. Then the real fear arrived. Melissa is freaking out. We already told everyone about the house. That sentence told me everything. Not regret for what they did. Embarrassment that they might lose face. I said calmly, that sounds like your problem. He lowered his voice. Come on, Dad. Don't do this to us. Don't do this to us. As if I had taken something. As if betrayal had happened in reverse. I looked out at the street and thought about every year. I worked overtime while Daniel slept peacefully in a warm house. Every school bill. Every emergency. Every sacrifice that had become invisible because it was expected. No, I said quietly. You did this to yourselves. I hung up. 10 minutes later, Melissa called. I let it ring. Then again. And again. By evening, I had 6 missed calls and 1 voicemail. Her voice was sweet now. Almost impressive. Walter, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We should talk like family. Family. That word appears quickly when money starts disappearing. I deleted the message. The next morning, Frank called. They want a meeting. Of course they do. He laughed softly. Should I schedule it? I stood in my kitchen, looking at the surgery estimate pinned to the fridge. The knee replacement I had postponed twice because I didn't want to feel like a burden. Funny, I had spent years trying not to inconvenience people who had no problem stealing from me. Yes, I said. Schedule it, because sometimes the most important meeting of your life is the one where you stop asking for respect and start requiring it. They arrived at Frank's office, dressed like people attending a celebration. Daniel in a pressed blue shirt. Melissa carrying a designer handbag. I was fairly sure my retirement fund had helped finance. They walked in with polite smiles, the kind people wear when they think charm can fix consequences. Frank greeted them professionally and showed them to their seats. I was already there, waiting. Melissa's smile tightened when she saw me. Walter, she said softly, like we were old friends meeting for lunch. We really just want to clear this up. I nodded. So do I. Daniel sat down and leaned forward. Dad, this has gone too far. I almost laughed. Too far. Not when they emptied my account. Not when they planned my nursing home. No, apparently, too far was when the bank called them back. Frank opened the folder in front of him. Let's keep this simple, he said. $400,000 were withdrawn from Mr. Hayes' retirement account and used as the primary down payment on your new home. Daniel crossed his arms. I had access. Frank didn't blink. Access for emergencies. Not personal enrichment. Melissa jumped in. We're family. It wasn't theft. Frank slid the bank records across the table. The court may see that differently. Silence. I watched both of them carefully. People reveal themselves when they realize kindness has expired. Daniel's jaw tightened. What do you want? There it was. Not apology. Terms. I answered calmly. My money back. Melissa shook her head immediately. That's impossible. It's already tied up in the house. Then sell the house. Her face changed. Real panic this time. We just moved in. I leaned forward. And I was planning surgery with that money. No one spoke. Because some truths don't need decoration. Frank continued. If repayment is not arranged, we proceed with full legal action. The property can be frozen, and ownership challenged due to fraudulent source of funds. Daniel looked at me like I had betrayed him. Amazing. The thief feeling betrayed. Dad, you'd really do that to your own son? I met his eyes. You sent your own father to a nursing home in your plans. That landed hard. Melissa looked away. Daniel said nothing. Because silence is honest when excuses run out. Frank placed one final paper on the desk. A repayment agreement. Full amount plus legal costs. Sign voluntarily, or we let the court decide. Melissa whispered. This is insane. I shook my head. No, what was insane was believing I would quietly disappear while you spent my life savings decorating your dream kitchen. Frank folded his hands. You have 24 hours. They stood to leave. No smiles now. No confidence. At the door, Daniel turned back. And for the first time, he looked like a son instead of a stranger. But what he said next proved I still hadn't seen the worst of him. He stood there with his hand on the office door, looking at me like I was the one destroying the family. Then he said, quietly, Mom would be ashamed of you. For a second, the room disappeared. Just that sentence. Sharp, precise, cruel, because he knew exactly where to aim. Margaret had been gone 6 years, but there are some names that still feel like open wounds. Frank looked up immediately, but I raised a hand. No, let him speak. Let him show me exactly who he had become. Daniel stepped closer. She would have never done this. She would have helped us. She would have wanted family first. Melissa stood behind him, silent now, letting him fight the dirty part. I looked at my son and realized something painful. He was using his dead mother as a weapon. And somehow, that hurt more than the money. I stood up slowly. My knees reminded me of every year I had worked for that family. Good. Pain keeps memory honest. You're right, I said. His face shifted, like he thought he had found the winning argument. I continued. Your mother would have wanted family first. I took a step closer. That's exactly why she would be ashamed of you. Silence. Complete. Because truth spoken calmly hits harder than shouting ever could. She would be ashamed that her son stole from his father. Another step. She would be ashamed that you planned where to put me after taking my savings. Daniel's face changed. Not anger. Recognition. Because some accusations don't need proof when guilt is already living inside you. And she would be ashamed, I said, that you learned to confuse love with entitlement. Melissa finally spoke. That's unfair. I turned to her. No, Unfair is spending 40 years building security and being told you're too old to deserve it. She looked away. Good. Let discomfort do its job. Daniel's voice dropped. We needed that house. I nodded. And I needed to walk without pain. He said nothing. Because there it was, his dream home against my surgery, his convenience against my dignity. And somehow, he had convinced himself those were equal. They weren't. Frank cleared his throat gently. We are done here. Daniel looked at me one last time. Not like a son. Like a man realizing consequences were real. 24 hours. He asked. Yes, Frank said. He nodded once. Then they left. The door closed, and the office felt quiet again. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. Frank handed me a glass of water. You okay? I stared at the door for a moment, then answered honestly. No, but I will be, because sometimes healing doesn't start when people apologize. It starts when they realize they can't keep taking from you. And that night, for the first time since the bank, I slept. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:12 a.m. Daniel. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice sounded different, less confident, more tired. We'll sell the house. No good morning. No apology. Just surrender. I sat at my kitchen table, looking at the sunlight coming through the window. Margaret used to complain I never cleaned properly. Smart decision, I said. He exhaled sharply. Melissa is furious. I stirred my coffee. She should be. Expensive lessons usually are. Silence. Then, quietly, you really would have taken it? The house? Yes. I took a moment. Because I wanted him to hear the truth, not just the anger. Yes, Daniel. I would have. Another silence. Longer this time. Because for the first time, he understood I was no longer negotiating from guilt. I was standing in self-respect. The realtor comes tomorrow, he said. We'll lose money. I almost smiled. Welcome to consequences. We all lose money, I replied. Some of us lose trust too. He didn't argue. Before hanging up, he said something small, something I had waited weeks to hear. I shouldn't have touched that account. No defense. No excuses. Just truth. Late, but real. I closed my eyes for a second, because part of me still remembered teaching him how to ride a bike in the empty church parking lot. Part of me still wanted to protect that version of him. But love without boundaries is how people end up homeless in their own lives. I know, I said, and we hung up. 3 days later, the sale sign went up. Melissa refused to speak to me. That didn't bother me. People who only value you when you're useful rarely handle accountability well. What surprised me was Ethan, my grandson, 17 years old. Quiet kid, smarter than everyone pretended to notice. He showed up at my house that Saturday afternoon with 2 burgers and an awkward expression. Mom says I shouldn't be here, he admitted. I stepped aside and let him in. Good thing you came anyway. We sat on the porch eating in comfortable silence. After a while, he said, Dad told me what happened. I nodded. He stared at the yard for a moment, then said, I think you were right. Simple words. But they hit harder than I expected, because children notice more than adults admit. He said you were trying to ruin them, Ethan continued. But honestly, I think they ruined themselves. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Because sometimes the person who understands you best is the one no one thinks is listening. A week later, the house sold. Fast, faster than Melissa wanted, slower than Daniel feared. They took a loss, a painful one. Between closing costs, penalties, legal fees, and the repayment agreement, Almost everything they thought they were building disappeared before they had even unpacked properly. Funny how quickly a dream home becomes just another address. Frank handled the transfer himself. Every dollar of my retirement fund came back. All 400,000, plus legal costs. When he handed me the final paperwork, he smiled. "Congratulations," he said. "You officially own your peace again." That sentence stayed with me. Because peace is expensive. Sometimes it costs money. Sometimes it costs family. Sometimes both. I scheduled my knee surgery the next morning. The receptionist asked, "Are you sure you'd like the earliest available date?" I almost laughed. After postponing it for 2 years, because I didn't want to inconvenience anyone? Yes, I wanted the earliest date. For once, I wanted my own life to come first. Daniel drove me to the hospital. That surprised me. He arrived early, quieter than usual, carrying coffee and guilt. We sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before going inside. Neither of us rushed to speak. Finally, he said, "I keep replaying it. The account?" He nodded. "No, the way I talk to you." I looked out the window. Sometimes apologies matter most when they arrive without an audience. "I was angry," he said, "but that's not an excuse. I got used to thinking what you had would always be there." I nodded slowly. That's the danger of dependable people. Everyone thinks they're permanent. His eyes filled a little, and for the first time in a long time, he looked like my son again. "I'm sorry, Dad." There it was. Real, not because he was losing money, because he finally understood what he had almost lost. I placed my hand on his shoulder. "I know, not forgiveness. Not yet. But a door left unlocked. And sometimes that's enough." Before I got out of the car, he said, "Melissa still blames you." I smiled faintly. Melissa can stay mad. Anger is cheaper than accountability. That made him laugh. A small laugh, but honest. Inside the hospital, as they prepared me for surgery, I thought about how strange life is. 40 years building security. One betrayal destroying it, and one decision rebuilding something better. Not just money. Respect. Boundaries. Self-worth. People think retirement is about slowing down. For me, it began the day I stopped letting people spend my life like it belonged to them. Recovery was slower than I wanted, faster than my pride expected. For the first 2 weeks after surgery, even getting out of bed felt like negotiating with an old enemy. But pain with purpose feels different. Every step hurt, but at least it was leading somewhere. Daniel came by more often. At first, I assumed it was guilt. Maybe part of it was. But then he started staying longer. Not just checking boxes, actually staying. He fixed the loose cabinet door Margaret used to complain about. He mowed the lawn without being asked. One Sunday, he brought groceries and ended up sitting with me for 3 hours, talking about nothing important. That mattered. Because repair doesn't begin with speeches. It begins with consistency. Melissa never came. No apology. No call. No message. Honestly, I stopped expecting one. Some people would rather protect their pride than save a relationship. That's their choice. And peace often begins when you stop chasing people who are comfortable losing you. Ethan still visited every weekend. Sometimes with burgers. Sometimes just to sit on the porch and complain about school. One afternoon, he looked at me and said, "Grandpa, I think this whole thing changed Dad." I leaned back in my chair. "I hope so." He nodded. "He talks different now. Less like everything is owed to him." I smiled. Pain is a brutal teacher, but sometimes it's the only one people listen to. A month later, Daniel asked if we could have dinner. Just the two of us? No Melissa. No distractions. We went to the small steakhouse. Margaret loved the one where she always ordered dessert first, just to annoy me. Halfway through the meal, Daniel put his fork down and said, "I spent so much time thinking inheritance was money. I never realized it was how you lived." That hit harder than any apology. Because finally, he understood. Not the bank account, the lesson. I looked at him and said, "Money runs out. Character stays." That was always the real inheritance. He nodded. And for the first time in years, the silence between us felt peaceful instead of heavy. When I got home that night, I stood in the driveway for a moment, looking at the house. My house. Still mine. My knees still a little stiff. My bank account restored. My boundaries stronger than ever. And I realized something simple. They thought they stole my retirement. What they really did was force me to remember my worth. I was never just an old man with savings. I was the man who built everything they stood on. And if they forgot that, life had a way of reminding them. This time, so did I.